Good evening and welcome to the Italian Impact Podcast. I am your host, Steve Stefano Mancini, and as always, I want to thank you, my listeners, and as I love to finally say, my listeners from all over the world, including lovely vacation hotspots like Russia and China. And I don't say that facetiously. There are actually listeners from countries that I never thought or imagined would be able to find me, yet alone listen to me. So as always, I don't care where you're from. If you're taking, 30 minutes or an hour out of your life to listen to me, I owe you at least a thank you. So comrades, thank you very much. And also a couple of updates here. If you have not had a chance to see the documentary, we are going to be finding out the results for some more film fests. As you know, this is now officially international award winning. I have to sell it, people. I mean, one day I do want to retire, so please get out there, check it out. It's going to cost you at least 99 cents, but it's really worth it. And I do say that sincerely. It's called Fedeltà, Soldier Prisoner. It's available on Amazon Prime, and it chronicles the story of 1,250 Italian prisoners that were kept at the Letterkenny Army Depot in Chambersburg, PA. And if you are ever coming through central Pennsylvania, I do encourage you to visit because several of the structures are still there, including the chapel that the prisoners built. So again, I really encourage you to stop by, visit it. It's a wonderful story. Having met the families, the kids and grandkids of the prisoners, just wonderful people. And I say that absolutely sincerely. And they're going to be coming back this year for the 80th anniversary. So it's not just all about selfish Steve trying to sell his documentary. It is actually because I want people to see it so that you can make plans in September to be in Chambersburg as we celebrate the 80th anniversary of the construction of the chapel. So about 30 or so family members are coming back from Italy, plus family members in the U.S., plus dignitaries. A lot of folks are going to be there. I cannot emphasize, please come by, meet these folks. You will have an absolutely fantastic time. So I'll keep pushing that out there. More details as the date gets closer. But right now, just mark your calendars for September 11th of this year to go to Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Another thing, as you know, I am the honorary consulate here, the Italian consulate here in Pittsburgh area. I will be moving my office. Folks have been coming to see me at the university. Unfortunately, the university has frowned upon my being the honorary consulate out of my office here. Therefore, I am going to be moving downtown Pittsburgh. More details to follow, but I'm going to have an official final home. And ultimately, it's about serving you, the community, and that's not just Pittsburgh. I am getting calls from people as far north as Erie, as far west as Ohio, and as far south as Virginia. So, in fact, people from New Jersey are actually calling me. So I apparently have become a focal point because I have, the audacity to answer my phone and emails. And when you do that, they come at you. But that's okay. It's a volunteer position. I don't get paid. I do it because I enjoy serving. And that's ultimately what this is about, helping you with any issues you have. So again, please continue to look me up. If you have any questions, I'm there for you. Oftentimes I'm going to tell you I don't know the answer, but I'll certainly answer your phone calls. So more details to come with that regarding the move to the new location. All right, enough blathering. Let's kind of jump into the show. And I have a wonderful guest today. And we were just kind of joking about beforehand how we're getting to know each other via text. And we've never actually spoken until now. So I am really excited to have her on here, Stephanie Detton. And I kept thinking for some reason she was out in New Jersey. But nope, she's over in Colorado. A very big difference between New Jersey and Colorado. At least it says so on the map. But she is the host of the Italian American Stories podcast, a very popular podcast, and I've listened to it, and I actually enjoy it. And she's actually listened to my podcast, but nonetheless, she still wants to be here. So I'm going to let her be here. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. And like you said, it's nice to actually hear your voice. So
no, Stephanie, it's nice to hear your voice. I got to work on my what I call it the 2 a.m. radio DJ voice. So you're up at 2 a.m. and you can't sleep. Well, here's a song from Barry White. Or something.
There you go. I think it's great.
I'm working on it. Stephanie, again, thank you very much for being on the show. And you're over in Colorado. Mm-hmm. But, I'll kind of jokingly say this, but I don't jokingly say this. A lot of people don't realize the footprint of the Italian-American community in the United States. So I always like to start off by introducing my listeners to my guests. meeting. Tell me about where you're from and, your kind of family roots and where they're from in Italy and all that good stuff.
Definitely. Yeah. So you're right about people not realizing the far spread stretch that Italian Americans have. So I'm in Grand Junction, Colorado, which is about 4 hours west of Denver. And my family, they came over from the Potenza, Basilicata region and Campania, and they went to Denver for mining. So my mom, she's also the co-host of my podcast. Her name's Sandra. She was born and raised in Denver, but eventually moved to Grand Junction. So while I was born and raised in Grand Junction, a lot of my Italian roots are in Denver. But so it's crazy. People hear Colorado, and you had Stephen Tishner on a while ago, and same thing with West Virginia. They don't really think Italian Americans went there, but they definitely did.
They went where the work was, right? And you said mining.
Yeah.
And it's funny you say that because I don't want to say I didn't know. I knew, like, in Pennsylvania, because a lot of the immigrants came over here. In West Virginia, they come over to work the mines. But I didn't realize how far west they went to work the mines.
Yeah. Well, and then even the railroads, because
right.
I'm learning the rich Italian American history here in Grand Junction, Colorado, and a lot of them worked the railroads as well. So, it's just amazing, the stretch. And then just the research that I do for my podcast. I mean, I've told stories about Italian Americans in Alaska and working on one in Idaho right now. Little enclaves are everywhere.
Wait a minute. You do research for your podcast?
Oh,
Hold on a minute.
do.
Note to engineer, Joe, remind me to do research before I bring guests on.
Well, it is because
you do stories, though, so it's very different.
Exactly, yes. So it's a lot of research and then writing the script. Sometimes I feel like I'm back in college and I'm giving myself homework, but it's worth it because I love it. So.
Well, it's funny because I think I kind of got an easy podcast. I'm like, all right, find good guests. Okay, Stephanie. All right, Stephanie. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you a question. You talk for 20 minutes. I'll go to a commercial break. We'll come back. I'll ask you another question. You talk. And thank you, folks, for joining my podcast. You'd never know it was my podcast.
Right. No, I've done a couple of interviews. Well, I've probably done 5 or 6, but most of it's stories. But yeah, when I do interviews, I'm like, oh, maybe I should switch my theme around here.
Isn't it easier to interview, huh?
It truly is, yeah.
Well, you know what? But it does depend on the guest, too, because I find that some guests, you're like, oh, so tell me a little about yourself. Well, I was born. Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, folks, thanks for tuning in today.
So, yes, for sure. It can get a little hard.
Now let's talk about. I'm going to go to the Italian roots. So, how far back? Like, when did your family actually immigrate here to the United States?
My first ancestor came in the late 1880s to Colorado.
Oh, so they've been here a while.
Been here a while. Now, my great-great-grandfather came in the early 1900s.
Okay, so normal.
About normal. So.
And you're pretty young because you say great-great-grandfather. I'm like, oh, boy, it was just my great-grandfather. So I'm like, back in my day.
Yep.
No, the reason I ask is kind of interesting because that's sort of far removed from you. But you kind of do something that I really like. Even though it's been, in some cases, maybe 100 years since the most recent immigrant probably came to the country, somehow you hold on, though, to your Italian, your roots. How did that come to be? So you obviously grew up and somebody kind of helped you reinforce that. So how did that come to be in your life?
So my grandfather, I called him Papa. He was I've heard the saying one time, he was the window into my Italian American pride, and that's how he was. So while I am that 3rd, 4th generation, I have such a strong connection because of him. I can remember him cooking and singing and talking to me in Italian. And culturally, I was raised Italian. Even though we moved to Grand Junction, I have those roots. And my mom kept a lot of those traditions and roots alive too. But definitely my grandfather. It's just, like you said, I'm very far removed, but he was born in 1924. So I think him knowing his parents and his grandparents, and then able to pass that on to me, that he was that connection between the ones who came over and me, this newer generation. So it's kind of cool because I have that old world feeling and those old world stories, but I live in this generation. And so he is definitely the window to that for me.
And that's huge. And I'll tell you why, because in my personal opinion, And I've said this before, and I'll keep beating. And the people that listen to the show are like, "Oh my God, is he going to give us with another, repeat the same thing?" Yes, I just believe that what you just said is exactly why remembering your culture is so important, because now it helps define you. So now you kind of feel like you're a more complete person because you have this connection to the past. Even though it seems like it's so far removed, they kept, it's almost like a tree. They kept branches alive so that you could see the flowers of the branches, and now I can grow new branches. Maybe you'll pass that on one day. But that's important, and I think that a lot of people don't understand why that's important. And kind of asking you that question, short of being just something you enjoy doing, why do you do it?
So I have always been into researching my family, genealogy, and pictures and stories are so huge for me. If somebody can tell me a story, I love it. If I can see a picture, I can make up a story. I can see that life. And so for me, when I was always researching and looking at newspaper databases for my own family, I would run across articles about Italian Americans that I didn't even know, but I was like, wow, that's a really cool article, and I'd print it off and keep it. And then one day I had this file full of articles of Italian Americans that I'm not related to. And I thought, these stories need to be told. They are not famous Italian Americans. They're not a Joe DiMaggio or anything like that, but they have a story that has been lost in these newspapers, or maybe their family knew it, but those stories have been lost through the generations. And that's how this podcast became. I just looked at that folder one day and I'm like, what am I doing? These stories need to be told. I need to get these stories out. And so for me, that's the biggest part for my podcast is I really want the unknown, not famous Italian American story told, because I'll go back to Joe DiMaggio. His story will be there forever. 100 years from now, people will be able to search him and figure out his story. But, I did a story on Margaret and Guido Rossi, who were cattle ranchers in Oak Creek, Colorado. That story will not be around if somebody doesn't dig it up and tell it.
Right.
If that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And that was my whole philosophy as well. It's like, well, people say, well, who cares about Guido Rossi, some guy from a long time ago? It's like, if he had not taken a chance, or whoever, come over here, go west, try this, do that. There's a ripple effect to every story. Now, of course, it's not just limited to the Italian American community. I'm not saying that. But, it's our responsibility as Italian Americans to continue to tell our story. And Absolutely. Those ripple effects of those events from a long time ago are still felt today. And that's why it is so important to remember that, because what I don't think people understand, and I really don't think people get this, we're actually under attack from within and from without. And I spent a lot of time in the military, in the government. And so I know all of the, quote, threats that are out there. And America, and people can laugh at this, but we are constantly being attacked in some way. And part of that attack is to basically undermine your history, because then it takes away your pride and where you're at. But the more you remember your history, whether it's your family or not, you say, well, these Italian Americans, they came over and they worked really hard. They did all these great things. And I'm so proud to be an Italian American. Then the harder it is for somebody to rip that out of you and make you something else. Because now you know 100%. Who you are. Now, let me ask you that, because, I'm sure you have friends, against my judgment, but I'll let you have them, that are not Italian. Now, when you meet these kinds of folks that are not Italian, I know, we all got them, right? So they're not Italian, and, maybe they're not so much into their culture. Do you sense a difference in who those people are versus, say, some of your friends who may be more connected to their past?
Oh, for sure. I have friends who are not Italian, but they listen to my podcast, and they're blown away by the stories. But they're, I can talk about my Italian heritage all day, but sometimes that's not the conversation. I feel like it's one-sided, right. Where they don't maybe have that connection. And not, like you said, it's not just Italian Americans. There are people out there who have a deep connection to their ancestry that's not Italian. But no, it's true. Sometimes I feel like I'm doing this thing. I'm all on my own, with my friends. They support it, but they don't truly understand it, I guess, is what you could say.
Right.
But no, it's what you were saying about history. It's so important. And we don't want to erase that. And I'll even have like you said, the ripple effect. I have had family members reach out to me and they're like, oh my gosh, you told a story about my great grandfather or my grandfather. I didn't know this part about him. And then they'll ask for the articles and stuff. And to me, that's everything, because that story has been revived and now they can tell their family members. So, but if those stories are forgotten, then somebody might not remember this great great grandfather that they had one,
Right. It makes them, it makes them feel good. It makes them feel proud. Like, wow, my great grandfather did that. That's pretty cool. Like, I didn't know, almost in a sense saying, I didn't know I came from that. Not all that history is, super exciting, but I'll tell you what, at the end of the day, I'll say this. Go back 100 and something years. Okay. Right. Maybe it's after World War I. Okay. It's in the 20s. Or maybe right before World War I, and now you're in Italy, or you're in Ireland, or you're in Poland, or you're in Germany, you're whatever. You're in some country that's having a rough patch, and you decide, okay, Mom, Dad, I'm going to America, and they say, oh my God, you're going to go to America, and you get your little suitcase, and maybe if you got somebody over there, and you put your $12 in your pocket or whatever, and you go down to a city that has a dock, and you find a way to get on that boat that's heading to America. Okay, you sail off into the ocean blue, and you arrive 1,000-something miles later, and you land in some strange country. There's nobody around there. There's no cell phones. There's no did he make it alive? Is he there? Is he safe? And you go through this, onboarding process. Maybe they let you in, maybe they don't. Again, something that drives me crazy when people talk about immigration. It's like, do you not know we've always had restrictions on immigration? But people don't know that. So maybe they let you in, maybe they don't. They say now maybe they let you in. Maybe you have a city you can go to because maybe you have a friend who came 3 years or a family member. So you find your way there. Maybe it's on a train or something, a bus, something. This is the early 20th century. And you make it to the city and you meet this person. And maybe that's the only person you know. You're not very good at the language. You have no money. You literally have no idea what you're going to do tomorrow. And then at the same time, the people on the other side of the ocean go, I wondered if he'll make it. I don't know. And maybe they hear from you within a year or 2 or 3. Maybe they never hear from you again. And you never get a chance to talk to them again for whatever reason. Now war breaks out, World War I, let's say, or maybe it's after World War I. Maybe it's, you're closing in on, Europe in the 30s where, Mussolini's in power. Nazis are coming to power. Everyone's, some countries were smart enough to arm up, and some thought, no, nothing will ever happen, whatever. But the point is, can you imagine going through that? I mean,
my gosh.
We just don't get the chance they took. And then the sadness on both sides of the water, knowing, hey, you think these people didn't love their families, that they just left them out of desperation. And I don't think people understand the risk that they took because they felt like, I've got to do this, And
then they created a whole life that has trickled down their generations. It's amazing to think about.
And that's why we got to do this, because we've got to honor that fact that they took a chance, that you are where you are because someone 120 years ago said, there's nothing here for me. I need to go try something different. And they took a chance.
Definitely.
All right, Stephanie, listen, I'm going to pay the bill. So I will be right back after this with Stephanie Detton from the Italian American Stories podcast. Thanks to Greater Pittsburgh Travel. For any of your travel needs, let Tom and the team at Greater Pittsburgh Travel know, and they'll take care of you. For more information, call 412-331-2244 or visit their website at www.greaterpittsburghtravel.com. For all of your plumbing needs, be sure to try Palucci Plumbing. Nick and the team have decades of experience and will get you back up and running. For more information, call Palucci Plumbing at 412-782-5050. And we want to thank the Calabria Club of Pittsburgh. If you're interested in learning more, you can find their contact information on Facebook at Calabria Club of Pittsburgh. Again, thanks Domenica and the team at the Calabria Club of Pittsburgh for your support. And we want to thank La Scuola d'Italia Galileo Galilei, the only nonprofit school in Pittsburgh endorsed by the Italian Consulate. If you're interested in learning Italian or have your children being immersed in the Italian culture and language, be sure to give them a call at 412-404-7070. And that's La Scuola d'Italia Galileo Galilei. We'd also like to thank Chris Gonzalez from the Knights of Columbus. If you have any questions about joining the Knights of Columbus, reach out to Chris Gonzalez at 412-605-9074. Okay, welcome back. All right, Stephanie, so we were talking about how you were going to send me large sums of money before the break. I will give you my address. Oh, wait a minute. No, I'm sorry. Wrong conversation. Stephanie, let's go back to you in the podcast. So the podcast, you have this idea of looking at old stories. Mm-hmm. How did the actual logistics and everything come to fruition? Like when did it actually take off and you said, I can do this, and you started doing it? How did this all work out?
Oh, so I think I've had the podcast for about 2 years now. And so, like I said, I had that file folder of articles that I had found, and that was my starting off point. And that's what I do is I go through newspaper databases. I try to find from all over the United States, and I've got a few. I tend to have a little bit more in Colorado just because it's easy for me to research. I can research their names and the locations because I know the area. But like I said, I've got Alaska, North Carolina, all sorts of places. And then I'll find an article, and then I start researching that person's past and their family tree, and I try to find other newspaper articles and piece their life together. So it's a lot of work, but I love that kind of stuff. Like I said, I'm into research and genealogy, so it's a lot, but I truly enjoy it. And then just getting to know these families, you almost feel like this connection with them.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's how I put the podcast together. I have had a few people reach out. So a Denver native, she reached out and had me do a story. She told me her great grandmother's story. And so it was fascinating. So I did that story. But yeah, like I said, I want those unknown stories. I have this, one of my very first episodes that I did, his name was Concheto Formiga, and he was in North Carolina, and I called him, well, I didn't call him, he was actually referred to as the Italian mummy, and he was killed. He was working in a circus, and got in a fight, and this guy killed him with one of the tent poles, and he was sent to the coroner, the mortician, and nobody came to claim his body, and the mortician kept him for 60 years in a glass closet until his family came and claimed him. So it's just, the stories from that to I have, murder stories to just family stories about ranchers in Colorado. Charles Siringo, who was a Italian cowboy who was with the Pinkerton Detective Agency. So I just really want those unknown stories and bring them back to life. So
I was going to ask you the most interesting story, but geez, how do you follow up with a mummified Italian in 60 years in someone's closet? You say, well, at least he wasn't buried in Giant Stadium. Hey-oh, that's a Jimmy Hoffa reference.
Oh, there you go. There's that one.
Let me ask you, what's been the biggest surprise for you doing this?
Oh, geez. I think the support for sure has been great from the Italian community. Sometimes I want to tell good and positive stories, but I also have other stories that, like my very first episode was Angelina Garamoni, and she murdered 2 women, but her story is so fascinating. So, there's the good and the bad, and even...
Whoa, you got to tell me the story. You can't leave me hanging high and dry. I'll link to the podcast for the people that are listening, but for me, I want to hear this.
So she was actually probably one of the biggest reasons I started the podcast. I ran across her story, and oh my gosh, she was so fascinating. She came over from Italy with her parents, and then she became this, they called her, she was like known as the Black Hand of North Denver, and then the Cassie Chadwick.
So early mobsters for you people that don't know what the Black Hand was. Okay.
Exactly. And she would buy properties for really cheap and then turn around and sell them for really expensive.
So she made them an offer they couldn't refuse. I get where we're going
Pretty
here.
much. Yeah. And then, she was into a lot of kind of like fortune telling and stuff like that. And so she ended up killing 2 women, and she went to prison, and then she was released, and she took off, and I have no idea what happened to her, but such a fascinating story. And so you're asking what's some of the most surprising things, even when I tell stories that are not shed the best light on the Italian American community. People are still supportive and are interested.
Every community has violence and murderers in it, not just Italians.
Exactly.
We just do it better.
We just do it better, and it's a part of our story. And I don't want to leave out stories that are fascinating just because they're not truly 100% positive. So I guess that's been surprising, is the support even for the little bit more negative stories.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I remember reading a story in a newspaper here in Pittsburgh, and it was two ladies that ended up getting into a stiletto fight. One of them was a Mancini, and I had to look and see, make sure he wasn't related to us, but she was obviously here before we were here. So, yeah, it's funny when you read those stories, you're like, yeah, that doesn't necessarily cast you in the best light. But on the other hand, damn it, she pulls a stiletto out of her bra and stabs the other lady who was coming to collect the rent from her husband, and the husband ran. It was a really crazy story from like over 100 years ago. But to your point, if nothing else, it's, version 1.0 of the Jerry Springer Show. So we have to enjoy it for what it was.
Yeah.
Where do you envision yourself taking the show, though?
Well, I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing as far as, doing all of these stories from across the country. I thought about taking the stories and expanding them out a little bit, adding more detail, maybe turning it into a book.
I was just going to ask you that. I was going to say, do you see yourself doing that at some point?
I do, yeah. I have binders and binders full of articles.
How far back do these go?
Oh,
like these are historical articles, obviously. You're going back, 100 years ago and reading like the clippings from some local Denver paper. Is that like kind of what you're doing? Okay, got it.
Yeah, like I just did Maria Barbella. She was this was like 1880, 1890-ish, and she committed murder in New York City. So anywhere from that to, I've done stuff about World War II, kind of like your documentary about the internment. I did a story about an internment camp. So the span is pretty wide. I do try to stay away from stories that are a little bit more current, just because
right.
some people might still be alive.
Right. No, I get it. And next thing you know, you're getting a call from the Black Hand with a horse head. I get it.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
No,
but yeah, congratulations on your documentary. Like I said, I've done an episode. I did the Fort Missoula internment camp in Montana. I did a story about those guys that were there.
That's I've been up there. It's so pretty. I love that whole area. Montana is one of those states that I think, I don't want to be there in the winter, but not winter. Mm-hmm. It's just beautiful.
In fact, the Italians that were sent to that camp, they called it Bella Vista. So beautiful view, because they arrived in summer. So
and then January, December, November, and February. Oh, wait a minute, what is the Bella Vista?
This is not beautiful anymore.
We don't go outside. No, exactly. but it is gorgeous country. Let me ask you a question. Were you able to talk with any relatives of the prisoners?
I was not. That was the 8th episode that I did.
Oh, gotcha,
so I was still pretty new at this, but I did watch a documentary on it. It was called Bella Vista, the Unseen View. And so that was a great, very fascinating. I watched your documentary, and there's a lot of connections. These guys kind of felt the same way. They were very positive. Even though they were a prisoner of war, they still got out of that and almost revered America, and they wanted to stay, and they were self-sufficient. They were, treated pretty well. I mean, and I say that as they are prisoners of war.
No, I totally get it. I totally get it. In fact, that's why people love coming to America. Once they get on the government handout, they never want to leave. Hey-oh!
Right?
I had to go there. I know,
there. They gave them olive oil, garlic, and spaghetti. And
they're just loving it. And they don't have to pay for anything. We just do a little bit of work. Can't go outside really in the winter. So we're good. You know what? It's funny you said the book, though, because I would be curious to see you write something about that, because I think it's a wonderful idea, actually, because even your journey to find all of these stories is, kind of fascinating, because there are historical societies, like Italian history museums, that they do two things, in my humble opinion. One, they focus on geographic areas, and two, they focus on the big things. And there's nobody really looking after, the little, I'm going to call it the little guy, but little guy or gal that has a story that maybe they didn't have family, maybe they didn't make $1 million, and it's kind of like, well, where can I go read about, some of those little tales? So I do think there's something there, and I actually hope you do that. And I'd love to read some of these stories. I just think they're fascinating. I just love to look back in time and kind of place myself in the shoes. And with that being said, let me ask you something. Do you ever feel like you get a different view? Like, are you able to put yourself in their perspective when you're reading these stories and kind of talk about them, maybe interview people that have a little more detail on it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's always interesting to me because I can research a story 100 years ago, and their living situation is different. Their technology is different. The work life, everything, but the human problems tend to be the same.
Right.
So we're fighting with our spouses. We're upset with a family member. We're upset with a friend, or we're just trying to start a business and become successful. Those human problems remain the same, it seems like, throughout the generations.
Like the good book says, there's nothing new under the sun.
Exactly. Yeah, we live different lives, and so you can imagine the heart, the grief that they felt or the love that they felt, because those are emotions that we still have. But sometimes reading those newspapers, the descriptions and the language is so different that it's fascinating to try to put yourself back in that time and place and think of, because their views were a little different on things. And so sometimes we have to put ourselves back in that time frame to understand this is where they were coming from. And so that sometimes helps me write the script, because you don't want to look at it always from this day and age, point of views, morals and ethics or whatever, because it was just different in the past. That was their norm. So
now, are you able to, or have you really tried to, in some of these cases, find living relatives from these, what I'll call historical, not so known figures?
I've reached out a couple of times, and sometimes I'll hear back, sometimes I won't. A lot of times I've had people reach out to me. I reached out to somebody who lives in Philadelphia, actually, and I told his grandfather's story. So sometimes I'll try to reach out. A lot of my stories are so old that I'm not sure,
it's tough.
Even who to begin to connect
with.
Well,
I definitely want to see, I would love to know if that lady who whacked the two ladies, if she has any great grandkids. I'd be curious. It would just be, in other words, it's really like, I kind of like what you said earlier, like you told a story about somebody's grandfather that they didn't even know. And I don't know, there's just something, there's something neat about that. To go because I feel like there's almost like there's when you keep someone's memory alive, you keep that person alive.
Yeah.
And I think when you learn something new, I think it's almost like I don't want to call it a connection, but it's almost like a rebirth in some ways of that person's memory in you. I don't want to get too philosophical, but the point is there is something. I was reading. There's a good book in the Bible where it talks about you shouldn't remember people once they're gone. You should let them go. And I don't necessarily agree with that, because I do think it's important to remember people, like I said, because it helps us remember and define kind of who we are. At the same time, it's like when I go to Italy, people say, "Why do you like it so much?" I say, "I don't know, to be honest with you. But when I go over there, I feel like I can be in the past and the present at the same time." Does that make sense? And
Absolutely.
So I wonder, like, do you ever feel like that there's something, these aren't just neat stories, there's some kind of connection or bond that gets created because you're doing this for these people that otherwise, it's almost like they reach out from the grave and say, hey, thank you for doing this, but just please don't tell them where I buried the bodies.
Right. No, I know. Sometimes I'm doing a story and I'm like, oh, that's a little scandalous, and you have that moment of, do I put this in? Like, is a great grandkid going to hear this and go,
Listen, if you want clicks, you put it in.
You put it in, exactly. I do try to walk that fine line of being respectful, but there is a connection. I feel such a strong, this is going to sound so funny, but I do feel such a strong bond to the stories that I tell. They almost become, I don't want to say my stories because they're not my stories, but like my family,
Oh, I get it.
And it's like I get that tingly feeling, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I found another article that puts this piece of the puzzle together, and and I love to do that with my own family because a lot of times Italians, we are a little secretive. So, when I can put some puzzles together and figure some things out, and you have that connection with them. I was listening to one of your episodes, and you said something about, we don't want to just walk by a dusty old grave and forget about it. And that's how I look at these stories that are lost in the newspapers. I don't want to just, if there's a story there, I want to tell it. And sometimes there's not a story there, and there's nothing I can pull out of it. And so I have these little mini episodes called Tells from the Archives, and, I'll just tell really quick what I know, and it might be a 3-minute story, but it's still a story that I feel like needs to be told. Like this one man was going to work one day and a bull chased him up a tree, and he spent the whole day in the tree. There was nothing behind it, but I still thought it was really cool, and that could have been somebody's great grandfather that spent a day in the tree because his bull wouldn't leave.
That is awesome. All he had to do was pull out his red cape and he'd been fine.
Well, and that's what they said. He had a red handkerchief around his neck, and they think that's why the bull chased him.
That's fantastic. No, but I do believe that, because I also believe that it's like, there is a respect we should show for the deceased, and I don't think anyone wants to be forgotten. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe some people don't care. I don't know that I even care whether I'm forgotten or not. Truth be told, I don't really care. But I know that I just think it's the right thing to do is to remember people. So, like I said, I'm sentimental, though. I mean, I'm a damn fool. I'm a sentimental fool. But before you tell people how to find your show, what's next besides the book and expanding things? What's some other things you might be working on?
Well, I actually just started another podcast, and I don't really know how I'm going to do this because it's like a full-time job.
Tell me about it.
So it's called Headlines and Tidbits, and it came about because of my Italian American Stories podcast. Because just like when I was researching my family, I would run across articles. Well, when I'm researching these Italian Americans, I run across stories about people that are not Italian American, but their stories are fascinating and mind-blowing. And I have this strong inclination to not let those go either. So I'm 2 episodes into that one, and it might just be a monthly episode, right. Like one episode a month show, because the time is really hard, and it's basically the same research and script writing as I'm doing with the Italian American podcast. But yeah, I'm 2 stories in. It's like one girl showed up in Denver, and nobody could figure out who she was, and one lady, she was in a car accident and bit part of her tongue off, and they were trying to see if somebody would sell their tongue to her.
Oh, my God.
Just like very fascinating stories. And so not only do I have binders of Italian American Stories articles, I have binders of articles that are not Italian American.
Can you sew a tongue back on like that? I mean, now I'm playing with my tongue going, how the heck would I don't know.
This was like 1911, so I don't really know what
they probably didn't know what they were doing.
They probably didn't know what they were doing.
That's crazy. By the way, I will give you, if I may, one thing I've learned. You see, this used to be called the Italian Impact Weekly podcast, and I was like, you know what? I'm not locking myself into weekly because I got a job. In fact, I literally have 3 jobs which pay for my hobbies like this and like the filming stuff. And of course, since the Italian content stuff is not paid, I don't count that as one of my jobs because I don't get paid. But technically, that's a 4th job. So where am I going with this? I'm not saying this is a boohoo, but I would tell you this. Do it because you enjoy it. Don't worry about your schedule. Try to be regular with the podcast and everything as far as regularity is concerned. But thank you. But be regular with as much as you can with the podcast, but don't feel obligated that, hey, if I don't do this every so often, you're like, the hell with them. You're doing this because you enjoy doing it and you're telling some awesome stories. And it is fun. You do actually have a really good podcast. So
Thank you.
I'm actually really happy I got a chance to meet you and listen to your podcast, because I think there's so many podcasts out there. We're in a crowded market, but not all podcasts are created equal. And I think you have a wonderful little niche going on there. And I really encourage folks to go listen to your podcast, which brings me to my next point. How can folks find you?
Oh, thank you. So Italian American Stories podcast, I'm on all the podcast streaming services, all the social media. If you just type in Italian American Stories podcast, will pop up. The logo is the same across the board. There's a website, ItalianAmericanStories.com. So yeah, just.
And I'll put that in the description so everybody can click on go to the website. And then you have a new podcast. What's the new one called?
Headlines and Tidbits.
Okay, and that's just started out. Again, I am excited to go listen to that one. I can't wait till you come to the East Coast or I go out to the Midwest and we meet in person. That will be step 3 of the completion of knowing Stephanie Detton. But Stephanie, I want to thank you again for being on the show. This was actually fun, and congratulations. I did not scratch your name off on people to never bring back. So I think what we're going to do is, you did it, Stephanie. Congratulations. No, what I'd like to do is actually bring you back, and we're going going to talk about some specific stories because there's a lot of fun things on there. And I think people will be kind of really surprised and really entertained, for lack of a better word, on some of the things you talk about. So I think it's wonderful. I do encourage folks to go out there and support, these Italian American folks that are out there trying to continue to promote the culture. Italian American Stories podcast is another one. She's coming out with another podcast, and there's a lot of them out there. So let's support each other. Go listen. And, as I like to say, I thank you for taking time out to listen to my podcast. So for everyone that tuned in from all over the world, thank you very much. And again, if you haven't seen the documentary, please go check it out. Fedelta, Soldier Prisoner, because I want to see you at the 80th anniversary in Chambersburg, PA, if you can make it. And I'm hoping to get down to West Virginia for their big summer Italian American festival. And I'm going to try and get out and travel a little more before I start filming this summer for my next project, which I will surprise everyone shortly on what that is. But that's a spoiler alert. I believe they call that, Stephanie. Anyways. All right, folks. Again, thank you very much for tuning in. Stephanie, you have a wonderful evening. I will talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you again for having me on. It was wonderful.
Awesome.